The laughter inside the mansion was loud enough to echo through the cold December night. Hani stood at the gate, clutching the small cake she had baked herself, the one with her late mother's favorite icing. Through the window she saw them. Her father, her brother Abio, and his wife, all smiling under golden lights. She took a deep breath and stepped in, heart pounding. But when she greeted them with trembling hope, Abio smirked and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This year's only for real family, Hani. You shouldn't have come." The room went silent. Even the Christmas lights seemed to dim. And that was the night everything changed. The night Hani decided she'd never beg for a place that was already hers. After many years abroad working as a nurse, Hani finally came home for Christmas. She had imagined this moment for so long. Her family smiling, welcoming her with open arms, maybe even saying how much they had missed her. She carried small gifts in her bag, simple things she had saved for, a warm scarf for her father, perfume for her brother's wife, and a handmade cake with her late mother's favorite icing. Her heart was full of hope and love as she stepped through the gate. But the moment she entered, the warmth she expected wasn't there. Her father barely looked at her. He nodded once and went back to his phone. Abio, her older brother, gave her a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. And then there was Tola, Abio's wife, who looked her up and down, her lips curling into a smirk. "You came all the way from abroad to bring this?" she said, pointing at the small bag Hani held. "Next time, maybe bring something useful." The words stung like a slap, but Hani stayed quiet. She placed the gifts under the Christmas tree, trying to ignore the laughter and whispers behind her. The house looked the same, yet everything felt different, colder, emptier. Every corner reminded her of her mother. The soft smell of cinnamon, the photo on the wall, the small decorations she used to hang by the window. Hani swallowed her pain and smiled politely, convincing herself that family always had ups and downs. Maybe they just needed time to warm up. When dinner started, she tried to join the conversation, asking her father how he was, sharing stories from her work at the hospital. But no one really listened. Tola interrupted her every few minutes, turning her stories into jokes, and Abio laughed along. Hani's father said nothing. His silence hurt more than their words. As the night went on, Hani's heart grew heavier. She had imagined hugs and laughter, but instead, she felt like an outsider in her own home. Still, she told herself to stay calm, to try harder, because this was family. But then, just as she was helping to serve dessert, Abio leaned back in his chair and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You know, Hani, this year's only for real family." The room went quiet. Everyone stared at her. Her hands trembled, and her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. That was the moment she understood. Some hearts never miss you until you stop waiting for their love. The dining table looked like something out of a magazine. Gold plates, candles, and a giant 3-tier cake sitting proudly in the middle. Right beside it was Hani's small, homemade cake. She had spent the whole night baking it with love, using her mother's old recipe. But now, it looked so small and out of place next to Tola's fancy creation covered in glittering decorations. No one even looked at hers. The guests praised Tola's cake, saying how beautiful it was, and Tola smiled proudly, glancing at Hani with a smug look that said everything. Hani sat quietly at the end of the table, trying to hide her embarrassment. She smiled when people looked her way, even though her heart was breaking inside. She had dreamed of this Christmas dinner being a new start, a chance to laugh together like before. But all she could feel now was how unwanted she was in the very house she grew up in. Her father didn't say much. He kept sipping his drink, pretending not to notice how his daughter was being treated. After dinner, Abio stood up and clinked his glass. Everyone fell silent. "This year," he began, smiling confidently, "we're celebrating only real family, those who never abandoned us." The words hit Hani like ice. She froze, her eyes wide, her fork slipping from her hand. The guests looked at her, some with awkward smiles, others whispering to each other. Abio's words echoed in her head again and again, "Real family." Tola leaned close to her and whispered with a fake smile, "Don't take it personal, dear. He's just being honest." Hani forced a small nod. Even though her throat felt tight and her chest ached, she quietly pushed back her chair, her hands shaking. She didn't want them to see her cry. As she walked toward the door, she could hear the laughter start again behind her, as if she had never been there. But just as she was about to step out, something made her stop. She heard Abio's voice, low but clear. "She has no idea about the sale," he said to their father. "Let's keep it that way." Her heart skipped a beat. The sale? What sale? She stood still, her mind racing. Suddenly, the humiliation didn't matter anymore. Something deeper, something hidden was going on. And she was determined to find out what it was. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Hani couldn't sleep. Her brother's words kept echoing in her mind. She has no idea about the sale. The sentence refused to leave her head. What sale were they talking about? And why did her father stay silent? Confused and restless, she walked through the quiet house, her footsteps soft against the floor. Every corner reminded her of her mother, the gentle woman who had loved her endlessly, who used to say, "Truth always finds its way home." As Hani passed the old hallway, her eyes fell on her mother's room. The door was locked, covered in dust. She hesitated, feeling a strange pull in her heart. That room had been closed since her mother's death. Nobody was allowed inside. But something inside her whispered that the answers she needed were there. She searched the hallway and found the spare key right where her mother used to hide it, under the small vase by the window. Her hands trembled as she turned the key and pushed the door open. The air inside felt heavy. Everything was just as her mother left it. The old dressing table, the photo frames, the folded blanket on the bed. Hani walked slowly, touching the things that once made her mother's world. Then on a high shelf, she noticed a small wooden box. It looked old, almost forgotten. She took it down and wiped away the dust. Inside were letters, yellowed, fragile, written in her mother's familiar handwriting. Her heart began to race as she opened them. The first few were personal notes filled with her mother's love and pride for her daughter. But one letter stood out. It was from the family lawyer. As Hani read it, her eyes widened in disbelief. Her mother had legally left part of the family land worth millions, in Hani's name, not Abio's. It was supposed to secure her future, her independence. But something was wrong. Attached to the letter were altered papers, the signatures smudged, the dates changed. Her breath caught. Someone had tampered with the documents. Someone had stolen what her mother left for her. Hani quickly connected the dots. Abio's whisper, her father's silence, the sudden coldness when she returned. It all made sense now. They had sold the property and erased her inheritance, pretending it never existed. Her hands shook, and tears rolled down her cheeks. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft wrapped in family love. And in that quiet, lonely room, Hani made a silent promise to her mother. She would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. Hani sat on the floor of her mother's room, surrounded by papers, tears silently falling as she read each letter. The pain of what she'd discovered was too heavy to describe, but as she reached the bottom of the wooden box, she noticed one envelope different from the rest. It was sealed carefully, and her name was written on it in her mother's handwriting, soft and familiar. Her heart ached as she held it close for a moment before opening it. Inside was a letter, one her mother had written before she passed, but never sent. The ink had faded a little, but her mother's words felt alive. "If you ever feel unwelcome, remember, the house is yours too. I left something for you in the safe. The code is the date I met your father." Hani read the line again and again, her hands trembling. Her mother had known something wasn't right, even before she died. She had hidden something to protect her. Hani quickly wiped her tears and looked around the room, searching her memory. There had never been a safe in plain sight, but her mother loved hiding things behind family photos and decorations. She stood up and walked to the living room, her eyes scanning every wall. Her gaze stopped at an old photo frame, a picture of her parents smiling on their wedding day. She took it down, and her breath caught when she noticed a small square outline behind it. Carefully, she pulled the frame away, revealing a built-in safe covered in dust. Her fingers shook as she tried to remember the code, the date her parents met. She whispered it softly as she turned the dial. When the lock clicked open, she felt her heart race. Inside were two things, a USB drive and a folded document sealed in a plastic cover. She took them out carefully and opened the document first. It was an original family agreement signed by both her mother and father, clearly showing that half of the estate legally belonged to her. Her hands trembled as she plugged the USB drive into her laptop. Old files appeared, letters, recordings, and scanned documents. One video opened. Automatically. It was her mother's voice, weak but clear, explaining that Abio had tried to transfer ownership of the land while she was still alive, and that she had gathered proof in case anything ever happened to her. By the time the video ended, Hani's tears had dried. Her grief slowly turned into quiet strength. She finally had the truth, and proof that her brother had stolen what was rightfully hers. That night, she made a silent promise to her mother's memory. She would not stay silent anymore. The next morning, the house was filled with chatter, laughter, and the smell of breakfast. Everyone was gathered around the big dining table, dressed in bright clothes, smiling for pictures as if nothing was wrong. But Hani sat quietly in her corner, her face calm but her mind sharp. She had spent the entire night watching her mother's video, reading the papers again and again. The truth burned inside her, but she knew today was the right moment to reveal it. Abio was at the center of attention as usual. He laughed loudly, boasting about how well his company was doing. "This year has been my best," he said proudly, lifting his glass. "And to make Christmas special, I'm gifting Dad a new car. He deserves it." The guests clapped, and their father smiled faintly, though his eyes looked uneasy. Tola, dressed in her expensive gown, added, "Abio works so hard for this family. We're all lucky to have him." Hani just watched, holding a small flash drive in her hand. Abio noticed her silence and smirked. "You've been very quiet, little sister," he said loudly, making everyone look at her. "So tell us, what did you bring for us this year?" "Another homemade cake?" The guests chuckled. Even their father avoided her eyes. Hani felt her heart beating fast, but she didn't flinch. She stood up slowly, her voice steady. "Yes," she said softly. "I brought something. Just a few memories you tried to delete." The laughter stopped. Everyone stared as she placed the small USB drive on the table. Abio frowned. "What is this?" he asked. Hani didn't answer. She connected it to the TV, and within seconds a video began to play. The sound of her mother's gentle voice filled the room. "If you're watching this," her mother said in the recording, "then something has gone wrong. Hani, my daughter, half of this family estate belongs to you. Never forget that." The room went silent. Forks froze in midair. Tola's smile disappeared. Abio's face turned red, while their father's hands trembled. The guests exchanged shocked looks. Her mother's signature appeared on the screen, along with documents showing Hani's ownership of the land. Hani turned to face them all. "You lied to me," she said quietly, her voice breaking just a little. "You took what belonged to me and pretended it never existed." Her father's face went pale, guilt washing over him. No one said a word. The truth had finally been spoken, and for the first time, it wasn't Hani who felt small. It was them. The room fell into a heavy silence after the video ended. Everyone stared at the screen, then at Abio and their father. Hani stood still, her hands by her side, her heart pounding but her face calm. Abio was the first to speak, his voice sharp and angry. "This is fake," he shouted, standing up so fast that his chair fell backward. "She forged everything. She's jealous because she's nothing compared to me." His voice cracked, but no one laughed this time. Hani didn't reply. She only looked at him, her eyes full of quiet strength. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to believe. Then, slowly, their father placed his trembling hands on the table. "Enough, Abio," he said softly, his voice weak but clear. "Stop lying." Everyone turned to look at him. His face was pale, his eyes filled with guilt. "I should have told the truth a long time ago," he continued, barely meeting Hani's gaze. "After your mother died, I let Abio take care of the paperwork. I thought it would keep peace in the family. I didn't know he changed everything until it was too late." The words hit Abio like a slap. "You're blaming me now?" he shouted, pointing at their father. "You gave me permission. You told me to handle it." But his father only shook his head slowly. "I trusted you," he whispered. "Your mother would never forgive what you've done." The guests began whispering among themselves. Some lifted their phones, secretly recording the scene. One woman murmured loudly enough for others to hear. "He lied to his own sister for money?" The murmurs grew, filling the air like a wave of judgment. Tola tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "It's not what it looks like," she said nervously, clutching her napkin. But no one believed her. Her polished smile faded as the truth spread across the room. Abio's face turned red with rage and humiliation. "You all think she's innocent," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "You don't know what she's capable of." He swept his arm across the table, knocking down plates and decorations. The crash made everyone jump. Then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Hani stood there quietly, watching him go. Her father covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. The guests started leaving one by one, still whispering. The glittering decorations now lay shattered on the floor, like their family's image, broken beyond repair. The truth was finally out, and there was no going back. Days passed after the chaos of that Christmas morning. The house that once felt warm was now filled with tension and silence. Hani didn't return there. She stayed in a small apartment near the hospital where she worked, thinking deeply about everything that had happened. She could have shouted, accused, or taken revenge, but she didn't. Instead, she chose peace, the kind her mother had always taught her to value. One afternoon, Hani sat in the office of the old family lawyer. The man looked serious but kind as he went through the documents she had brought. He adjusted his glasses and said, "Your mother was very careful. Everything she did was legal and valid. The property truly belongs to you." He handed her the official papers, confirming what she already knew but needed to hear. Hani closed her eyes for a moment and whispered a quiet thank you. She had finally reclaimed what was hers, not by fighting, but by standing in truth. Over the next few weeks, she finalized the paperwork and regained her share of the estate. But she didn't celebrate or post it online. Instead, she used a large part of her inheritance to rebuild the women's shelter her mother once supported, the same place her mother used to volunteer, helping widows and young girls. Hani felt her mother's spirit there, in every brick and every smile of the women she helped. It was her way of turning pain into purpose. One evening, there was a knock on her door. When Hani opened it, her father stood there. His face looked older, his shoulders heavy with guilt. He held a small bag of fruits, his hands shaking slightly. "I let him turn me against you," he said softly, his eyes filling with tears. "I should have protected you, Hani. Your mother would be disappointed in me." Hani didn't speak. She didn't need to. She looked at him quietly for a moment, then stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. The small dining table was already set. 2 plates, simple food, nothing fancy. They sat together in silence. No arguments, no apologies, just the quiet understanding between a father and daughter who had lost too much time. As they ate, her father smiled faintly for the first time. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered. Hani looked at him, her eyes calm. She didn't say a word, but her silence carried forgiveness, pure and complete. The room was simple, yet filled with peace. Weeks passed, and Abio's world began to fall apart piece by piece. The empire he had built on lies and greed started to shake. News spread quickly across town that his company was under investigation for fraud. The land deal he thought no one would ever question had come to light. Reporters camped outside his gate. Investors pulled out their money, and his business partners stopped answering his calls. The proud man who once looked down on everyone was now surrounded by silence and fear. Soon the government froze all his accounts. His luxury cars were taken, and the mansion that used to host big parties felt like an empty shell. Tola, who had always loved the spotlight, couldn't handle the shame. She packed her designer bags and left without saying goodbye. "I can't stay with a man who's finished," she had said coldly before walking out. Abio watched her leave, realizing she never loved him, only his money. In panic, Abio searched through his phone for someone, anyone who would listen. Almost everyone had turned their back on him. The only name he hesitated on was Hani's. He stared at it for a long time before pressing call. When she picked up, her voice was calm and quiet. "Hani, it's me," Abio said, his voice trembling. "You've heard what's happening. They're taking everything. Please, I need your help. We're family. You can't let them destroy me." There was a pause. He could almost hear her breathing on the other end. When she finally spoke, her tone was steady without anger, just truth. "You taught me I wasn't family," she said slowly. "Now I'm just respecting your rules." Those words hit him harder than any punishment. The line went silent after that. Hani didn't hang up in anger. She simply ended the conversation with peace. Abio sat in his office, surrounded by empty chairs, unpaid bills, and memories of the people he had used. For the first time in his life, he realized what real loss meant. It wasn't about the cars, the house, or the business. It was about the trust he had destroyed, the love he had pushed away. He remembered Hani's face, calm, forgiving, strong, and felt a pain deeper than money could ever fix. For the first time, Abio understood that losing everything was easy, but losing someone's trust? That was forever. Hani's father retired not long after the scandal. The once powerful man who used to walk with pride now preferred quiet mornings and simple meals. He sold his big house and moved into a small home just a few streets away from Hani's. At first, he didn't visit often, unsure if she would even want to see him. But Hani, in her calm and gentle way, never pushed him away. One day, he gathered the courage to knock on her door. She opened it with a soft smile, not the smile of the past, but one that carried peace. From that day, he began visiting more often. Sometimes he would help her distribute food to widows and orphans through the community projects she funded. Other days, he would sit quietly, watching her work and seeing in her the strength he once failed to protect. In the village, people often said, "You can tell a good man by the way he raises a good daughter." And he would smile with tears in his eyes, proudly replying, "I didn't raise her. She raised herself through pain and truth." He often told everyone how proud he was of Hani, not because of the money she inherited or the land she reclaimed, but because she had turned her pain into purpose. She forgave him without words, and that forgiveness became his greatest gift. As months passed, his health began to fail. The man who once commanded meetings now struggled to climb stairs. When the doctors said his heart was weak, Hani didn't hesitate. She moved him into her home, preparing his favorite meals, sitting by his side each evening. She never reminded him of the past or the pain he caused. Instead, she spoke softly about her work, her dreams, and the shelter she was expanding in their mother's name. On his last night, he held Hani's hand, his eyes filled with both sorrow and peace. His voice was weak, but his words were clear. "You became everything your mother dreamed of," he whispered. A tear rolled down his cheek, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. He took one last breath, not in regret, but in peace. Hani sat there, holding his hand, her heart heavy yet calm. She knew he had finally found his redemption, not through wealth or apology, but through truth, love, and the quiet forgiveness that healed them both. A year later, Christmas felt different. Not painful, not lonely, but peaceful. Hani stood in a decorated hall filled with warmth, laughter, and the sweet voices of children from the shelter she rebuilt. The event was a charity dinner in honor of her parents' memory. Every table was filled with people whose lives had been touched by her kindness, women who had found shelter, children who now went to school, and neighbors who once pitied her now looked at her with deep respect. As the music played softly, Hani looked around and smiled. The lights shimmered gently, reflecting off the ornaments she had chosen herself, simple, beautiful, and full of meaning. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about peace, healing, and the kind of joy that comes after pain has done its work. Then quietly, someone entered from the back. Abio. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, older, and worn out by guilt and loss. For a moment, the memories of betrayal flashed through her mind, but so did her mother's words about grace and strength. Abio walked slowly toward her, holding a small envelope. His eyes avoided hers at first, then finally met them, full of shame. "I can't undo what I did," he said softly, his voice trembling. "But I hope one day you'll let me try." For a long moment, Hani just looked at him. The hall was filled with laughter and music, but between them was silence, the kind that carried years of pain and lessons. Finally, she gave a small, gentle smile. "Forgiveness isn't about letting people back in," she said quietly. "It's about letting yourself breathe again." Abio nodded, tears filling his eyes. He placed the envelope on the donation table and walked away, blending into the background as the children began another song. Hani turned back toward the stage, watching their bright faces as they sang with pure joy. The lights glowed softly around her, wrapping her in warmth. It struck her then. This was the same night, the same season she had once been humiliated and told she didn't belong. Yet now, she stood in a room filled with love, purpose, and peace. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. She finally understood that belonging wasn't something others gave her. It was something she had carried within her all along.